Welcome, everybody. My name is Geoff Dohrmann. I'm the founder and CEO of Institutional Real Estate, Inc. And we're conducting an interview today with Carlos Infantes and Steve Pinedo, the founders of ExcelSense, which is an emerging prop tech company. I should note that I'm on their advisory board along with Asier Mansour, who's of counsel to the Townsend Group, and former head of research and investment strategy for CBRE, and before that DWS, and before that REEF. Joining us is Barbara Camden, who is the founder of Institutional Property Consultants and currently serving as the CEO of a KBS-sponsored traded REIT listed on the Singapore Exchange. She's also a NCREIF ambassador. And along with Douglas Putas, the former head of research for Bentall Kennedy and former head of NCREIF and former head of research at AEW. So really impressive group of people advising these people, which I think says a lot about them. So having said that, allow me to allow them to introduce themselves to you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Geoff. My name is Steve Pinedo. I'm responsible for operations here at ExcelSense. My career spans 25 years in enterprise technology with firms such as Oracle, BEA Systems, and then most recently at Amazon Web Services, where I led a team focused on enterprise SaaS adoption. And it's great to be with you today.
Great. And Carlos?
Hello, Jeff. Thank you for having us. My name is Carlos Infantes. I am the CEO of ExcelSense. Been over 20 years in real estate. Most recently led a REIT that we had with KKR and Altamar, where we developed this technology as an internal tool, and we basically spun off this technology about a year ago.
Why don't we start by just, what is ExcelSense? What is it and what does it do? And then we'll get into the problems that it solves and what the value is. But first, just in a nutshell, what is it?
All right. You know, let's get into the discussion, and I think then we can kind of take things in and out. But I think the main problem here is that you have an industry like commercial real estate that is dealing with over $10 trillion, and they're doing it depending mostly on a spreadsheet, mostly Excels, which implies that you have a very inefficient, very manual process, and that you're incurring in plenty of risk associated to the increased complexity of the portfolio that you're managing, risks that are associated to security, to asset performance, and to capital management. And it seems crazy that the industry at this point is at this stage, because you wouldn't think that any reasonable, any competent enterprise today would manage their customers, your customers' relations through Excel or through Rolodexes for that matter, right? It doesn't make any sense, but that is in comparable terms where we are at this point in terms of commercial real estate as a management.
But you know, everybody, as you said, uses spreadsheets. I mean, maybe they've got a portfolio management system, maybe they've got a property management system, maybe they've got a fund administration system. But out of those systems, they're modeling data in spreadsheets. That's the way it is done, and that's the way it's always been done. What's so wrong with that? Why isn't that okay?
Yeah, that presents, Geoff, that constant use of spreadsheets. It does two things that are really inhibitors to the safe operation of these funds and really to the growth of these funds. And if you look at this from a large fund manager perspective, when you're operating all of these individual spreadsheets that are resident upon individual controllers' computers, there's really no way to take the data that lives within this large organization and compile it and analyze it all together, because it's in these component pieces that are spread everywhere. So it makes standardization, it makes harmonization, and it makes being able to see relationships across a very wide portfolio very challenging, because your information is delayed and it's fragmented. So by using an enterprise application like ExcelSense, you can start getting a macro view of all your individual asset and portfolios and start seeing relationships that you couldn't see before.
So what happens, or what could happen, when somebody transfers data from one system to another?
Yeah, right now, it's a great question. Right now, that happens largely via email. And the challenge from a security and a governance perspective is your very proprietary data is now being shared amongst multiple email servers that happen to serve your operators or your investors, et cetera. And every one of those points is a point of vulnerability where that email could potentially be intercepted, decrypted, and then that data analyzed. Similarly, when you're sharing data and compiling all these spreadsheets, you introduce errors into the system. And when these errors occur, they're not visible immediately, and they can become very challenging to go back and find the original source of an error. So it's this sharing of data, although it's very common, is very problematic.
But again, going back to, this is the way people do it, and kind of embedded in the structure of all of those different spreadsheets is the DNA of each organization.
Yeah.
Each organization has a unique way of looking at the data, massaging the data, and then within each organization, different analysts, different, portfolio managers, different marketing people, different other kinds of finance executives have different ways of looking at the data and massaging the data.
Absolutely, and I think this is one of the reasons why spreadsheets are kind of the default, because the flexibility that you need is a reference, right? So it's been very hard until now to replace it, but it's been happening in every industry. It's not different than every other industry that needs to kind of put together a reasonable or intelligent data management system. You can't just keep writing in cells and completely contaminating the data and having this level of inaccuracy and risk associated to it. But in order to do that, you have to create the right tool. And this has been a complex issue. I think, if you look at the landscape, at the real estate the prop tech landscape, and you think of it as a cell, you were right. At the very core of the cell, the nucleus of the cell, is kind of the brain, the place where you have to kind of bring all the information that comes from the membrane that is in contact with the world, whether it's a pipeline or construction management, operations, all these other tools in the prop tech world are in the membrane, and it's providing all this information that is very relevant into the nucleus that needs to calculate all the time this model to be able to make rational decisions or relevant decisions, right? So, and once you have that information in the nucleus, you have to send back the stimulus out, right, to the other side. So you have Juniper Square on the other side providing information to the investors, right? So you have one input coming from Yardi and the membrane goes into the nucleus. You use Excel because you don't have anything else at this point. You create that information and you send it back out to another element in the membrane that is very sophisticated. It's particularly, very, very, very specific for that particular task, and it works very well. So why we haven't done anything at the center yet is, I think, because at some point, we are, to a certain extent, this is kind of the reasonable process where you kind of go from outside into the center. And the other reason is because I think, even though real estate is it's a very ancient activity, professional asset management is actually a relatively new discipline. And so it has taken time, and this is I think a natural process of going. I think technology also helps. Now we are familiar with SaaS. We are kind of comfortable with cloud computing. There is a lot of capabilities now to do that. And there is a lot of pressure in the industry because the drivers in terms of being able to report constantly and to be able to have capabilities of fast reactions like COVID or now maybe inflation, things like this needs to allow you for multiple, very complex modeling with parametric capability. So this is very hard to do if you want to do it without risk in a spreadsheet. And now I think, it's a reasonable time for these portfolio lifecycle managers, which are kind of the nucleus of the real estate, to kind of take shape. And that's a very interesting, I think, time for asset management and for us, I think.
So what does the software do? In other words, what does it do for me that I can't do myself or can't get yet my MIS department or my IT department to address and build?
Yeah, Jeff, what the application really does is it takes this information that is residing in these spreadsheets and many of the brilliant calculations and the methodologies used to determine decision points using Excel, which is a very flexible program that Carlos alluded to. And it takes that and it abstracts at a level where you're able to pull the underlying data into an enterprise application that allows you to do this at scale. So do all these Excel calculations at scale in a way that's transparent and scalable across the organization. So it doesn't replace the use of Excel. It really takes and augments the use of Excel, where people can still come up with ways to do things or methodologies or ways to align their chart of accounts, but then bring an enterprise grade security, auditability element to that, and allow companies to scale rapidly using this. And you had a great example earlier about where companies may have a really proprietary way in which they're using Excel to determine something for an asset value. Maybe it's in hospitality, or maybe it's in hotels. But when you use that in an enterprise app instead of on Excel, you're able to take that and identify it as a best practice and use it on all of your hotels, or use it in multiple geographies, or in multiple portfolios of assets, in a way where you're able to take that best practice and then share it across applications. So it really takes those Excel spreadsheets, it pulls them up into an enterprise tool, and then allows you to manipulate that data without having to go back and pull additional inputs from additional spreadsheets.
Now, is your system replicating those spreadsheets in an enterprise platform, or is it replacing those spreadsheets with a standardized set of tools?
It's replacing the spreadsheet. So for the three main activities that you need to do during the lifetime of a project, which is, you gather and structure information from multiple places. You then take that information and you build and constantly update models. And ultimately you take the result of those models for different scenarios, and you have to put together the reporting. All that today, you do it within kind of the Excel or the spreadsheet ecosystem, right? And we are kind of taking all that away from this manual kind of risk process. But the way you deal with the platform is relatively similar. So it's kind of a natural transition for anybody that has worked with Excel to kind of look at those cash flow models and start establishing the relationship between the elements in a very similar way that you would do in Excel. What is interesting of this is that people really hate to see numbers, unless, people like me, but in general, numbers are not a very easy thing to deal with, especially when you have multiple vehicles with multiple app properties and with multiple scenarios. So what we're trying to do, and what we have been able to done very successfully in my old company, is to convert everything into a graphical visualization of variation of indicators, or investment indicators variation, which I think is the most important, let's say, the most important advantage of using something like ExcelSense. Because when you are dealing with these cash flows that are reasonably structured in the back end, all these indicators are being recorded constantly, and it's providing you with a visualization of how things change, why, when, who touch anything in your system. So you have this kind of a very intuitive way of understanding where the problems are when there is a problem, or where the opportunities are, depending on the different scenarios that are working. So having that possibility, having that visualization is critical, and having the capability of later on, having the history, the audit trail, and the possibility of, in the future, AI learning from that process is also very important. So you can't really give away all that. You can't have any of that if you're just using Excel and you are kind of overwriting them, and you have multiple meshes of different types of platforms or templates, right?
How would you counter somebody who said, geez, it all sounds wonderful, but you're asking me to give up the way in which I currently operate and embrace the way you're recommending I operate? And if I wanted to operate the way you want me to operate, why don't I just hire you? Why do I need your system?
Yeah.
So this is a very common situation where you're confronted with a series of tension, right? You want to grow. And if you're not growing, if you're doing what you have been doing so far, you have certain pressures that you're going to have more reporting to be done, because reporting is becoming faster and more dynamic, and people expect more of you. And you're having another line of reporting very quickly that is going to be the net zero metrics, and so you're going to be pushed around, but you might still get away with it. But if you're going to grow, and you're going to grow by adding more headcount into that very precarious formula where you have spreadsheet, manual processes, and a lot of risk depending on who is managing with these things, then I think you're going to carry a very hard and very debilitating position in terms of, so this is a little bit like if you would be driving, right? You want your car now to drive you. You don't want to be worried about driving everything. You want to be thinking about how you can create more value for your customers, for your clients. You want to be thinking about where you want to go. You want to be ready to grow, right? But we are kind of like looking at the signals and making sure that there is not someone, processing this. It's a very mechanical thing. It's not really the core of what we can produce. I mean, we can give as asset managers. If we can let the machine do what in our experience has been 75% of the mechanical work, and this is my experience in my own company, after we implemented 75% of the recurring activity, which was very mechanical and not really value added, and it took a lot of resources and a lot of our worries, right, was automated. We multiplied by 6 or AUM, and we didn't have to increase our team, and most important, the executive level was suddenly release of a lot of worries or a lot of insecurities about how good that data was. That kind of sense when you start trusting the machine and you say, yes, this thing actually drives even better than a human. And I have the feeling that I can have an audit trail, and I have all these capabilities to understand very quickly with a very quick, very, very clear, comprehensive graphic dashboard if something has happened. Otherwise, I'm okay. Then you start feeling I can grow. I can go to that other part. I can create other vehicles or other asset classes. I can go into other operating models. So this is the critical thing. Yes, you can stay where you are, but you're going to be taken by a tsunami of really smart data management and automated processes, and you're going to be doing the mechanical thing instead of the really important thing.
So let's say I'm a commercial real estate firm, a small one or a large one. What's the value proposition? What do I get from shifting over to walking away from many, maybe all of my spreadsheets and integrating into a platform like this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. Let's start with the smaller company. So say you're an asset manager, you're managing $300 million worth of assets, and you've developed a real expertise in some element of commercial real estate. It could be, selling and managing residential rental homes. It could be apartment complexes. It could be retail. It could be central business district. But you've really developed an expertise in that area, and you want to grow, and you really want to convince other limited partners to invest substantial sums because you're able to deliver outsized returns to those investors. The thing that's holding you back from being able to grow and service those additional customers is the need to hire additional controllers and portfolio managers to feed more resources into this very manual process. So you have growth speed bumps there that are preventing you from really growing as fast as you naturally could based on your area of expertise. And we see this in multiple small asset managers who are really using ExcelSense to magnify their growth and be able to grow without the burden of having to hire and train additional controllers. That's on the small side. For large firms, we see a tremendous opportunity to standardize the reporting and capitalize on best practices, whether it's in a geography or whether it's in a specific industry sector, where those firms are starting to see the ability to better serve their LPs and better serve their customers by offering them more timely, more specialized, or more standardized data inputs that come from their operating units. So those are the two principal value propositions that we're hearing our customers tell us around using ExcelSense.
But don't other applications already do the reporting and modeling? What is ExcelSense doing that other systems can't?
They don't do all of it. Nobody really has an application that's designed to do what ExcelSense does for CRE asset and portfolio managers. Some of them will do parts. Some of them are very good on the operating side, very good accounting systems, very good deal management systems, very good rent systems and rent control systems. On the other side, for portfolio management, there are very good reporting systems, et cetera, but none of them are at the core, as Carlos was talking about earlier, none of them are at the core of taking these two universes and meshing them together and doing the work that Excel is doing right now. So
they don't replace those systems, they augment them, is that correct?
no, they augment those systems.
If you go back to this idea of the cell, we don't want to, and there's no interest whatsoever to replace anything on the membrane. We need the membrane. Every single system at the membrane that is specialized with one of the activities, whatever it is that you need to do in order to be successful in your investment, whether it's Uniper, Square, Yardi, or Procore, any of this, are absolutely necessary because they provide significant relevant data for the model. But modeling itself is the core. Modeling is something that today it's done in Excel for one simple reason, because you need to have flexibility in order to create your reporting structure and your reporting criteria in terms of like, how are you going to define your asset management fees or your promotes or any other kind of financial characteristics that, are supposed to be quite specific, but they're just, very parametrical things. Let me, when we started about 5 years ago, we felt like we had this idea, this very clear that we couldn't grow just by bringing more people. So we said, okay, let's look if there's something off the shelf that we can use. And the truth was that at that point, it was nothing that it wasn't either very expensive or very complex to implement, that you needed a specific consultant to develop for you. And we felt that what it was there was really not flexible to provide us with everything that we needed. Now looking back, I feel like we didn't even know what we needed, and that's a problem that we are seeing to our with our customers. Because as an asset manager, if you are a small asset manager that you have 200-300 million and you're trying to grow, you have been very busy just growing and setting up your company and raising capital and making sure that you're performing. And you're just inheriting all this mesh of historical tools, basically spreadsheet templates and other kind of relationships. And if you ask exactly how do you want to grow, what do you need, it's already too complicated. You don't even have time to do that. Now, we were very aware of this, and we started to develop this not as a portfolio lifecycle manager. At the beginning, we developed as an internal tool just to control our performance. And then when we saw that we had real-time visibility on the performance, we said, well, wouldn't that be good if we could reconcile the forecasting and the reporting tools structure with the accounting information? Then we put that together and say, oh, we can model this in real time, all the time, with multiple scenarios with just one data entry point. And then we said, well, now that we have all these indicators in real time, all the time being calculated, and that gives us so much capabilities, not only for performance, but now for reporting, let's automate all the reporting and all the output. And then when we realized that we had kind of done almost everything that is in the center of that cell, in the brain. And when we had it, we said, okay, well, that's a good time to launch ExcelSense. So that was about a year and a half ago. And so we have been kind of adapting what it was an internal tool to what is now it's a full enterprise solution. I wanted to kind of give you two ideas that for me were very essential when we implemented it, right? Things that came out very, very powerful to me, and I didn't expect it, right? The first thing is this idea that what gets measured gets done, right? And this is a very powerful thing because it seems obvious, but if you are an asset manager are interested on certain indicators, whether it's IRR or yield or whatever it is, right? That's what you should be measuring all the time. And when do we measure it? Every quarter, 10 days before we report, right? The rest of the time, you're basically looking at other metrics like do we have over cost, or are we delayed, or are we meeting the rental targets? But if you convert every single one of those things in real time to the indicators, then what you're measuring is the indicator. And when you rally everybody behind the indicators, then you can see immediate change because people realize what is important to them. what is important to the actual team. It's not, you don't know, you're blind, because the system today, I think, it still works with this idea of the operational versus the informational silos. And what we are doing in ExcelSense is making this holistic, workflow environment that when someone introduces data in our platform, is telling you this is the impact that this is having in an indicator. There is a variation that is critical, explain, and then this thing kind of gets all together and it gives you very clear image. So these two things are critical, rally everybody behind indicator variation in a graphical way so people understand very quickly what is happening and why, and then give feedback down, don't only extract information from the operational into the reporting, but kind of create that transversal environment where people can really rally, right? I think those are things that Excel don't do. And today you have a lot of people that extract information and puts it into something, a business intelligence like Tableau or BI. But they're only one way. There is no feedback. You can't really rally anybody around that. It's great for report, but that's not enough at this date, right?
So how long does it take to install and configure ExcelSense? Does it require application integration by systems integrators?
Yeah, no, it doesn't require any of that, Jeff. ExcelSense is a SaaS application built on Amazon Web Services cloud software, and it takes about 2 days to implement and onboard with the customer. So there's no application integration necessary. There's no hard coding necessary. There are no changes to customers' core systems, either on the accounting side or the reporting side, necessary at all. ExcelSense is a pure SaaS overlay and takes just a few days to implement and be live.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand it in comparison to Excel. How long does it take to onboard Excel? You can take a lot of time to really get the best out of it, but you can start modeling and start connecting right away your accounting and mapping everything within hours for each vehicle, right? You have to set up a vehicle if it has different accounting system and everything, but within hour, you have a vehicle and you can drop assets into that. And this machine is smart enough to start learning from the past in terms of how the accounting has been, the accounting information, and you can give them some parameters for them to do most of it. There's some critical lines that you have to follow up and obviously be on top, but there's a lot of things that you do today in Excel that is really not that critical in terms of modeling, and the machine learns it in its own way.
I can tell you why I was intrigued by the whole thing when you first approached me, Carlos and Steve. It's because for years I've been listening to our colleagues at Real Foundations talk about the difficulty that people struggle with all of these spreadsheets and moving data around. The problem they identified is the first problem and challenge is defining what goes into each field. And you think that would be easy, but they've discovered that, when you have an organization with many, many people, it's really hard to maintain governance and discipline and making sure that the same kind of information you think is going into each field is going into it. Second, when you're moving data, there's always the problem of data leakage and data corruption. Your transcriptions, all kinds of problems when you're trying to move data from one platform into the other. And those two things really struck me. But the other thing that struck me was I've also been doing a lot of reading of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, which talks about psychological biases, and his most recent book, Noise, which talks about how when you have multiple decision makers involved in a process, they introduce noise into the decision-making process because they're not on the same page when it comes to their various biases or how they're feeling even at the particular time that they make a decision. And it's really well documented stuff. It's really interesting. And he makes the point several times in both books that when you move to a well thought out, well designed algorithmic approach, mechanical approach, like you're talking about, you always outperform individual thinkers. Doesn't mean that there's no role for judgment. And he talks a lot about in the books about the role that judgment plays. But placing judgment in things where you shouldn't need to have judgment is a waste of resources and introduces a certain bias or opportunity for errors, or what he calls noise. So that's what really kind of attracted me to this whole idea. Now, And you would think that because this is such a well-recognized problem, I mean, I don't think anybody listening out there is going to say, oh, those guys are crazy. That's not a problem. Most people recognize it. But why do you think, after all this time, that this application hasn't already been built? Why are all of us still using spreadsheets and relying on spreadsheets?
Yeah, I think, I totally agree on those points. I think exactly that is the kind of situation that we live with, and we have kind of assumed that it has to be like that, right? But the truth is that once you imagine this in ExcelSense, and we have in the portfolio that I used to manage, we had multiple assets, and for every asset we had about 40 indicators being run constantly on different scenarios and being recorded, right? If you make a mistake on the way you attach something, or you map something, or you introduce something, somehow one of the indicators is going to give it away. If you change it, if you make a mistake on a comma, or if you put it in a different place, automatically, whether it's the NOI, or is the financial cost, or is the IRR, someone is giving you an alarm, right? And the fact that you can provide that kind of level of immediate recognition of an error, it's kind of like the the Toyota thing, right? It's like you stop the machine and you say, wait, what's going on? When people realize that you can be on top of every of those changes, people become a lot more conscious, and they start advancing on two things. One, they reduce the errors because they are being very conscious that it has an impact, and there is a machine looking at it. And the other thing is that they are asked to provide any kind of comprehensive answer to anything that has a relevant change. So this kind of goes together with any change. So if there is a change and there is a comprehensive answer, we all know why that happened. If there is a change and there is nothing around, then it's more immediate that you get an email and you say, why did that happen? Oh, that was a mistake, and you put it in. That kind of simple exercises that requires a lot of back-end thinking in terms of connections, and there is a pattern that we work on this process, is at the core of this. It's making sure that this indicator. Now, why this hasn't happened? I think you needed to have a lot of domains a very big domain expertise, not just a technological capability. You had to understand this from inside, and in that sense, because for many reasons I've gone through the whole chain in terms of in the real estate. I was curious enough to be learning from all those processes and then converting that into a technological solution. But I also think it's just the time. We're having a very interesting and very healthy competition coming into this space, and I think it's just the time for this to happen. Now that you have the membrane completed, and you have a new breed of leaders in this in asset management that are now very data driven, that they're very familiar with the technology like SaaS and cloud. It's a time. It's just, and we cannot afford not to have the data. And suddenly, there's a lot of pressure. The big drivers in the industry is that you have to grow, and you have to grow no matter what. And when you do that through consolidation, you have problems of kind of merging data. That's a lot of problems there. You have also a lot of fee compression, and you have to deal with that in terms of not putting more people on not throwing more people in the equation. And then you have all of the things like security, AI readiness, and now you have net zero, which has become a huge deal. It's like, can you report also on carbon emissions, and how are we neutralizing our portfolios and this type of thing? So this is just about data. And I remember when we did the transition in my company, I mean, I was at the time the CEO, so I had a lot of toolbox to kind of not only implement a software, but actually change the culture. I think it's very important I think the most critical thing, if you want to do this, is to have a full commitment from the executives level, right? You have to have real belief that this is the way to go. You have to go into making data center stage in your company. And if you do that, then this is possible. Otherwise, even if you make the easiest way of onboarding, just people are just going to fall back into the default, which is use your Excel and your little notebooks, right?
Steve, you had mentioned earlier security and compliance concerns when you're sharing things around using email to share data. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's enterprise applications are far more naturally secure than desktop applications, which are 40 years old. So ExcelSense is built on Amazon Web Services, so it uses the AWS shared security framework. So we know where the data is. We know how the data is encrypted, both at present and in transit. And enterprise applications through the controlled access and the audit of access is far more secure than desktop applications. Similarly, with Sarbanes-Oxley, CFOs and CEOs sign and attest to the accuracy of their financial statements at every quarterly and annual reporting. And they put themselves personally liable for the accuracy, and they attest to the accuracy of those numbers. And we know that there are many errors made in using Excel, and that those errors are quantifiable. And they resulted recently in the Pennsylvania State Teachers Funds misstating net assets. And now they're having to go through a very painful process of data audit and forensic accounting to try to get back and uncover and unravel where those errors came from, sitting on multiple spreadsheets. So we see there's both a security problem, and there's also a compliance and a SOX related problem with the continued use of these manual spreadsheets. So we think ExcelSense offers senior leaders of asset managers and portfolio managers the ability to adequately and proactively address those concerns with an enterprise-grade, secure, auditable application.
Yeah, and I remember when I was serving on a public board of a public company when Sarbanes-Oxley was being implemented. And the thing that the accountants and the auditors kept punching us in the face with was over-reliance on spreadsheets. And their goal was to get us to a point where we were zero spreadsheet. Everything was being done through enterprise software. There, we had to invent it ourselves. There wasn't a product like this that we could purchase. So yeah, it's come a long way since then. So what would you say is the secret sauce that ExcelSense provides for a commercial real estate portfolio manager?
Yeah, I would go back to this idea that, let the mechanical be done by the machine. So let us drive the car. We want to have asset managers concentrate on creating value to their customers, right? So this is the main idea: is everything that you think is automatable and that you think it's not really the critical value of what you can provide in terms of your expertise and your knowledge, your industry knowledge, that could be done, even if it's very complex. I mean, there's nothing more complex in here than driving a car through a city. So in terms of, if we think about, no, but I have a particular template, we have set up ways that you can have full flexibility in terms of how you report, how you structure your information. You can convert those reports into multiple different reporting types for different investors that are requested different ways. Doesn't matter. All that, it's been done. It's just, the problem was that you had to go through these, very complex, consulting processes. Now you're going to be able to test it and use it, and then you can feel comfortable. That's the idea. Feel comfortable to grow and go wherever you want to go and enjoy the trip, right?
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting at our last CEO summit in New York, right before the pandemic. The discussion was almost entirely, for the entire day and a half, focused on data and data science. And it was interesting that almost every single firm had a data scientist on board, except one who said that he's going to, as a result of the discussion. And so obviously the mindset at the CEO senior level that you need for adoption is there. The question is, are they better off hiring your system and implementing it than they are in replicating what you've already built and creating their own system in-house? There's a trade-off there in terms of what your system will provide and what it won't provide in terms of the customization that they're probably seeking. So how do they navigate that trade-off and make a decision as to whether to adopt?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Jeff. At AWS, we liked to talk about how the machine takes on the undifferentiated heavy lifting. And so when it comes to processing, when it comes to manipulating, securely transporting and rendering data, many of those processes are non-differentiated and don't represent sort of discrete competitive advantage. Every one of these asset and portfolio managers is really good at something. And right now, they have to not just be really good at something, but they have to be fairly good at everything else. And that burden of having to be fairly good at everything else takes time, focus away from what they're really good at. And so what ExcelSense does, and the ability that we built this out of the, off the shelf for everyone to use, allows them to really focus on developing what they're really good at and how they can then double down on those and eliminate this growth drag and let the system do this undifferentiated heavy lifting and allow them to focus and grow.
Okay, now
I don't think anybody that doesn't have over $10 billion can even think about spending the resources to develop something like this. I think what we are interested in is to have that long tail that doesn't have the capability at this point of even thinking about how to do this, because to be able to use it with relatively low cost, much lower than it would cost you to get another line of financial controllers and asset managers, and then be able to enjoy the advantage of having other type of data that would be crossed with this, like market information or aggregated that will tell you whether you're an outlier in certain positions, something like this. So I think even if you are very big, you will still fall short within certain time of an application that has been used as a general thing. And I think this is nobody, even if you're very big, are going to create another sales force for yourself when there is something that you can kind of use it, and it's advancing constantly and is getting better. Right?
So how can I learn more about ExcelSense?
So visit excelsense.am and research our products and read about some of our customer success stories there, or an email to sales@excelsense.am, and we'll get back to you for a complimentary product demonstration. And if you're interested in piloting, a no cost, no obligation pilot.